#1 trusted dating site. Start for free today.
Everyone age 65 and older needs to hear it. The flu and its complications can be deadly, especially for those with a chronic medical condition. Ask your healthcare provider for a senior flu shot. Do it today.
Podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening?
Why Is This Happening with Chris Hayes. New episodes every Tuesday.
Then came an expose from someone who rode the celebrity status at Trump's bidding, who described life around the president as unhinged. And this week, we got Watergate sleuth Bob Woodward's reporting, which all the president's huffing and puffing is not likely to blow down. In it, we read once again of what we learned elsewhere. Most frightfully, the dawn to midnight effort of White House staffers to protect this country, not from foreign forces, but from the president himself. And now on September 5th, 2018, comes the most piercing news about the man who sits in Lincoln's chair. It is the witness of a senior administration official who has penned an anonymous op-ed piece for the New York Times that lays the entire horror story bare. Of how senior officials in Trump's administration come to work each morning determined to frustrate Trump's own worst inclinations. That's right, to save us from him. Of a president who's today acting in a manner detrimental to the health of the country, a president who lacks the basic morality to even lead the country. And this is where we stand right now, as we've come closer and closer to seeing the brain and belly of this administration. We've come upon what Donald Trump has wrought, an American government forged of resentment, driven by a childlike hunger for attention, ignorant of important American history, incompetently and meanly led, bereft of those values that, at our best, have taken us forward. And that's hardball for now. Thanks for being with us. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The people closest to the President of the United States are sending flashing red warning signals to the American people about the danger this man poses to the nation. Tonight, the New York Times published a stunning op-ed written by an anonymous senior administration official whose identity is known to the newspaper, which describes a resistance within the administration in which the author and others are working behind the scenes, in the author's conception, to save the country from the president. Quote, "We believe our first duty is to this country, and the president continues to act in a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic. That is why many Trump appointees have vowed to do what we can to preserve our democratic institutions while thwarting Mr. Trump's more misguided impulses until he is out of office." That is, of course, entirely consistent with journalist Bob Woodward's account of the Trump administration in his new book, and with just about every single tell-all and blind quote published in the last year and a half, all conveying that the officials who know the president best, around him every day, talk to him constantly, think he is unfit for the office he holds. They just won't come out and say it publicly. By the way, if any of those officials are watching, we'd love to have you on this show. Just call up our control room. They'll patch you right through. We'll talk. According to the op-ed's anonymous author, the president's own cabinet considered trying to remove him from office. I quote again, "Given the instability many witnessed, there were early whispers within the cabinet of invoking the 25th Amendment, which would start a complex process for removing the president. But no one wanted to precipitate a constitutional crisis, so we will do what we can to steer the administration in the right direction until, one way or another, it's over." Until one way or another, it's over? Sure makes you wonder what ways they might have in mind, what they think might be coming down soon. The White House released a statement highlighting the president's electoral college win, slamming the op-ed author as, quote, "gutless anonymous source and a coward." About an hour after the op-ed was published, the president appeared at a White House event with a group of sheriffs and put on a display that did nothing to contradict the characterizations of his temperament, either in the editorial or the Woodward book.
We have somebody in what I call the failing New York Times that's talking about he's part of the resistance within the Trump administration. This is what we have to deal with. And, you know, the dishonest media, because you people deal with it as well as I do. But it's really a disgrace. I will say this. Nobody has done what this administration has done in terms of getting things passed and getting things through. A article was just printed, just came out a few minutes ago. Trump breaks the record for budget gridlock wins. So if the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020.
Joining me now to talk about today's extraordinary developments, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator, the last time that you were on, I said something like, this is unsustainable and untenable and unbearable, the situation we are in, and it's only gotten worse. What are we seeing right now?
Well, this is the latest act in, what is a continuing three-ring circus. It's weakening America all over the world and, frankly, pushing a lot of people away from politics and civic participation. Listen, at the same time, this article in the New York Times is a little bit hard to understand. I understand that, they may be trying to rationalize and justify working with someone that they perceive to be deeply immoral, but, history is replete with individuals who, after the fact, tried to justify working for a regime that they deeply disagreed with, and history has not passed kind judgment on them. I'm not saying that the Trump administration is Vichy France, but we know how this goes down after the fact.
Well, this gets to something that op-ed talks about that has been sort of the constant central conundrum, which is that the president's instincts and his rhetoric and his behavior are obviously wholly outside the bounds of norms and the rule of law, frankly. But he has been rather impotent in many ways in imposing that will on the institutions. An example, this is the president's tweet just now, the president of the United States in response to the op-ed. Does the so-called senior administration official really exist, or is it just the failing New York Times with another phony source? If the gutless anonymous person does indeed exist, the Times must, for national security purposes, turn him, her over to the government at once.
Yeah, well, that's not happening. That's not happening. He's certainly implying that there's some legal repercussions for telling a story to the New York Times, which, of course, there isn't under any federal law that I know of. These kind of threats are often just that. They're just rhetoric. They're just threats. They're just trying to scare others into silence. But ultimately, this individual's name is not going to be turned over to the White House.
Right. I guess the question is, you said this the other day. We had you on the program. I talked about the legitimacy of the president and the degree to which that's called into question. You made this point that I thought was interesting is it's dangerous to talk about legitimacy in this sort of nebulous space when there are constitutional remedies. There are constitutional remedies of the 25th Amendment, impeachment, 25th Amendment discovered in this. And a lot of people are watching saying, what is the tripwire here? What do we have to see? What has to be waved in front of the American people that gets Congress to that point? And maybe it's just a question of which party controls it.
So, as someone who is leading the resistance to Donald Trump, let me introduce another subtlety here, which is that Donald Trump didn't disguise who he was during the campaign.
No.
Donald Trump didn't run a campaign in which he advertised himself as a deeply stable, thoughtful, nuanced thinker. America had a pretty good idea that they were electing someone who was reckless and divisive, who was going to govern by the seat of his pants. And so that creates another question for the democratic checks that exist on a president who may be out of control. If the American public chose an individual that they knew to be reckless, does that give permission to the legislative branch to remove him? I think those are all questions that if we ever get to that moment in which we're having that conversation about an impeachment power, we'll have to put on the table.
Well, and there's also the fact that as this happens, as we watch this play out, right, on Capitol Hill today, it's this bizarre spectacle of business as usual, right? So the president, after the sort of unprecedented obstruction by Mitch McConnell, keeping Merrick Garland from even having hearings, this president, who people around him are running to every reporter and every outlet page they can to send the warning signals, has hand-selected this individual who comes before the committee today to testify. And it's all just as if we're supposed to, I guess, just say, well, this is just how it goes.
Right, and this really won't stop unless members of his own party start doing meaningful things to stand up to him and stop his agenda. And by and large, what you have seen is a lot of rhetoric that runs counter to the president's, to the way that the president talks, and people willing to talk anonymously about their work inside the administration. The fact of the matter is, the person who wrote this piece is working inside the White House. We actually see him take even more meaningful actions against the press. Listen, I don't want to.
If you serve the government of the United States and you swore an oath to preserve and protect
the president that he makes public every day, you know, it might make someone afraid of what the consequences are, particularly when you have a president who's very not just litigious, but threatening. The things that's required to trigger it is to get cabinet members to agree that the president is not able to serve. How do you get the cabinet members to start to turn on him? Maybe this is a strategy.
What this moment needs is moral leadership. And moral leadership is not consistent with anonymity. And if you want to get cabinet leaders to actually be able to stand up and do the right thing here, you don't do it by hiding behind anonymous sourcing rules. You do it by putting yourself on the line. And whoever did this, gave the president a talking point. Fake news, makes up sources, gutless, all that. And by the way, that person also eroded an important norm. And that norm is the president is actually entitled to the honest services of the people who work for him. And they shouldn't be taking things off his desk so that he can't sign them. And they shouldn't be secretly making him seem more presentable than he really is. They should be serving him until the day they can't do it honestly anymore, and then they should resign and tell us why.
I agree with that. Just hold that thought for 1 second. I just want to read the New York Times, because you talk about the anonymity obviously sort of looms over all this. The Times editor's note in which they give their explanation of providing said anonymity. The Times today is taking the rare step of publishing an anonymous op-ed essay. We've done so at the request of the author, a senior official in the Trump administration whose identity is known to us and whose job would be jeopardized by its disclosure. We believe publishing this essay anonymously is the only way to deliver an important perspective to our readers. To Ben's point here, what is being described in the op-ed, in which they talk about basically a two-track presidency, right? Like Trump does his stuff and he says that we kind of take care of it. But the op-ed editor says that there are adults in the room. Like, don't you worry, we got it. It does present a profound democratic crisis.
Absolutely.
I mean, the country is in the midst of a profound democratic crisis.
Absolutely. And I think this goes back to the point that this is not an administration with a moral compass. It's not just that Donald Trump doesn't have one. So to expect suddenly, after all that we've seen come out of Donald Trump's mouth and all of the threats and all of the public statements from Charlottesville and saying problems on both sides, right? I mean, the fact that you didn't have cabinet members coming out and saying absolutely not.
No, and in fact, what they did back then, to Ben's point about cowardice, right? What they did after Charlottesville was leak to reporters that they were very troubled and considering resigning.
That's right.
But then staying on.
Exactly. And then what happened to that supposed deal of, of folks who were going to stick together and resign together if one of them got fired?
Committee to Save the World, yes.
So I guess the only thing is, why would we expect a moral compass from this individual when we have not seen one
around him
for anyone?
This is the point made in the op-ed, Ben, about the amorality. The root of the problem is the president's amorality. Anyone who works with him knows he is not moored to any discernible first principle that guides his decision-making. And then I want to get your reaction to this other part, which to me strikes me as an attempt to rehabilitate in advance the reputation of the Republican Party and the conservative movement that has been the facilitator of Donald Trump. Don't get me wrong, there are bright spots that the near ceaseless negative coverage of the administration fails to capture. Effective deregulation, historic tax reform, a more robust military, and more. But these successes have come despite, not because of, the president's leadership style, which is impetuous, adversarial, petty, and ineffective.
So, a couple things. First of all, I thought you were going to raise something else, which is that it's a prospective effort to rehabilitate the reputation of the individual who will someday acknowledge what he or she has done. Look, I think that this individual, here's the ultimate piece of evidence that this individual is not behaving in a heroic fashion, which is that this is a senior administration official. That's a somewhat flexible term of art in journalism, but it means